Hey friends, SGT here, and I want to ask you to think with an open mind for this call. I've got Harley Schlanger, the national spokesman for the LaRouche organization and a campaign coordinator for LaRouche PAC on the line, and I want to welcome you. Harley, thanks for taking the call.
My pleasure, Sean. Good talking to you.
Well, it's good talking with you, and I just want to level set for everybody because LaRouche PAC traditionally has been a political action committee in support of Democratic candidates. And as you know, because I know you've been following some of the work on SGT Report, we really try hard to be free thinkers, and we're looking for truth, Harley, wherever we can find it. And a lot of the things LaRouche has been saying, Lyndon LaRouche has been saying, have really, really been resonating with me. And I wanted to get you on the line to talk about a variety of issues. I know first and foremost for Lyndon LaRouche, he's been saying in order to essentially save humanity, and he doesn't mince words, which is one of the things I really love. I love his candor. He says we need to impeach Barack Obama immediately, and we need to re-implement Glass-Steagall post-haste, because if we don't, catastrophe is the only possible outcome. So that's why I wanted to get you on the line. You're speaking to a lot of libertarians, a lot of people who know that this left-right paradigm is a false paradigm, but here you are saying this left-sitting Democratic president needs to be impeached. Harley, thanks for taking the time to talk with us.
Well, it's my pleasure, and just as a way of a preface, let me say that the designation of LaRouche as left is something that came out of people who essentially tried to pigeonhole him. And because he knows quite a bit about Marxism, they said, well, he must be a Marxist. But at the same time, Democrats have consistently been told we're right-wing, we're neo-Nazi, we're somehow affiliated with the Ku Klux Klan, we're anti-Semitic. So we've been given run the gamut of slanders against us. And I think that, as you know, oftentimes that's a deliberate strategy to avoid discussing the real content of policy. And so, as you have identified yourself as a truth seeker, I think that's what I have always been. That was what attracted me to LaRouche in the first place, where he said, don't go by labels, don't go by designations, find out for yourself what's true about somebody and what their ideas are. Try to get the method by which they think. And so, on the question of Obama, you know, when he first, I was probably, I know I was the only person from the LaRouche organization at the Denver, Colorado 2008 Democratic Convention trying to identify for people that they were about to make a catastrophic mistake by nominating Obama, because Obama was a candidate of George Soros and certain kinds of speculative money laundering interests who wanted to make sure that the policies which had led to the collapse of the financial system between 2007 and 2008 were not changed, that there would be no attempt to stop the speculative bubble, or to stop the bailouts, I should say. And of course, Obama has proven LaRouche right. He's continued the catastrophic bailouts, and that's why, among other things, and of course then you have the indefinite detention, you have all these other things that he's done toward police state measures. And so our opposition to him is not based on left-right, it's based on his anti-constitutional policies.
Well, it's just so refreshing to see this happen, that people on the left, people on the right are all starting to break their conditioning and come together, you know, as the founders intended, to turn the apparatus back, you know, in favor of liberty, in favor of what the founders set up. Now, what you guys call, and what you're sort of dedicated to, is, quote, reproducing the American system tradition of Constitution and the founding fathers, of what they set up for us. And that's what I love about what you're doing and the truth that your organization is speaking about.
Well, you know, the American system was a product of a war against an empire, and that empire still exists. It's in a different form. It's not the same British Empire enforced by clipper ships and controlling all the seaports, but the people who run that empire tried to recreate what was the old Venetian Empire, which is a parasitic financial system, which is based on control of the money system. And this is, in fact, what the Founding Fathers were fighting. And there's a direct connection to the battle today to fight against the same kind of financial system, which, of course, with computers and with so-called financial innovation has changed dramatically. But it's still based on the same thing, that a certain group of people can control the financial powers of government and use government to serve their ends. And, of course, isn't that what we've seen since the collapse of Lehman, whether it was Bush, Cheney, and Hank Paulson, or whether it was Obama and Geithner, that what they've put first is speculative financial interests. And what they've least been concerned with is the physical production of a nation whose power comes from its physical production. That's the starting point for us in dealing with this Glass-Steagall issue today.
Harley, I know you've described what's currently happening as essentially a return to imperial monopoly policy, essentially these too big to fail banks. It's a mirror of the British East India Company. I mean, when LaRouche talks about the British Empire being at the crux of this whole thing, help us understand that, because I get a heck of a lot of emails from people that tell me it's the Jesuits, it's the Vatican, it's the Jews.
It's the Jews,
right?
Yeah.
Help me understand what is going on here. Now, the British East India Company clearly is the model, right? They want to return us to serfdom, and the corporatocracy is all that matters. Just help us level set. When LaRouche talks about the British Empire being behind all of this, and Obama as being a pawn, essentially, a tool, a puppet of the British Empire under their full control, help us understand how he knows that. Help us understand how that's possible.
Well, for the sake of brevity, I won't go back 4,000 years to the history of empires, but I assume most people realize we had a succession of empires, including the Roman Empire, the Venetian Empire, and then the most modern version is the Anglo-Dutch, which came about after 1688 and took over the crown of Great Britain. Now, our founding fathers developed the American system to take power away from them and to make the sovereign not a crown which bestows monopoly privilege on the few, but that the people, through representative government, through a republic, would be the ones who decide what the policy should be, including currency, credit, and debt, which is in our Constitution. Now, if you look at what we face today, we have what LaRouche identifies as the City of London, Wall Street interlocking board of directors, so to speak. The too big to fail banks in the United States, with the Royal Bank of Scotland, the Inter Alpha Group of Great Britain, which is the modern version of the Rothschilds. It was set up by Lord Victor Rothschild in 1971. It includes Deutsche Bank. It includes BNP Paribas, the largest bank in France. And what do they have in common? They're looking for the quickest return of money that they can make, the quickest profit that they can get. And so they oppose the idea of nations that are interested in longer-term projects that will increase productivity and lift all boats. They're interested in short-term profit. And when you start studying this, and we just put out a special report on this, which we call a Global Showdown Against the British Empire, which names the names and goes through this. But what you have is an interlocking board of directors that controls a group of cartels in all areas: a finance, insurance, banking cartel, the oil and strategic metals cartels, the grain cartels, the pharmaceutical cartels, and so on. And these are not constituted in the interest of any nation, but they function now as international speculators. And so whether it's the health care bill of Obama, which was really an insurance bailout and a pharmaceutical bill, or the banking bailout, or in fact today the assertion of this new idea of the right to protect, that we have to intervene without going through a constitutional process. We have to intervene in Libya or Syria or wherever our great leader decides we have to intervene. This is, if you look behind it, it's an attempt to force Russia and China to submit to this international financial oligarchy.
Right.
And the Russians aren't going to do it, because the Russians say, look, we have raw material wealth and we're concerned with the future of our people.
But let me jump in and say this is why it's so important that people understand this, and this is why I appreciate so much what LaRouche and what you folks are saying, is that Obama and the people to whom he's beholden are going to push us right to the edge of thermonuclear war, because Russia will not back down. Take it from there. I mean, this is very, very, very serious stuff.
Well, and this is absolutely right. And this is where you see a, just a handful of people in the Congress who have some sense of this. Recently, Representative Ron Paul said he's going to put forward a bill that there can be no intervention in Syria without going through the constitutional requirement of the Congress. Representative Walter Jones of North Carolina has a bill, HCR 107, which reasserts the Constitution, which is, in Jones's bill, it's a very short bill, but it says it's an impeachable offense for a president to launch military offensive actions without going through the Congress. It just restates the Constitution. Jim Webb, the outgoing Democratic senator from Virginia, said that the right to protect idea, this humanitarian intervention idea of the UN Ambassador Susan Rice and Samantha Power, who's a special advisor to the president, they basically think we can just go in and bomb the hell out of any country because the country doesn't adhere to policy views of the Obama administration. And this is where the connection is between war making and finance. Why would they do that? Look, the whole transatlantic financial system, after 4 years of bailouts, is more bankrupt than it was when Lehman collapsed in 2008. They've done nothing but put guarantees of the Federal Reserve System into the hands of the bankers, the gangsters who run these multinational corporations, to back up toxic debt, which should have been wiped off their books in September 2008. Instead, we're still providing 0% interest to them so they can keep selling these toxic assets. And now we see the same thing with the euro. It's not Greece that's being bailed out, it's the banks that are holding Greek sovereign debt. It's not Spain that's being bailed out, it's Spanish banks, including Banco Santander, which is part of the Rothschild Interalpha Group. So the question that we pose when going back to the idea of the American system is the right to national sovereignty, that governments are constituted so that people can act through institutions of self-representation to make the determinations of whether we're going to extend credit or not. And this is where you see the unconstitutional nature of the Federal Reserve System. There's no oversight by even government on this. It's totally controlled by private banks. And that's why we say it's the old British system. This is why we fought the revolution.
Now, with men like Zbigniew Brzezinski behind Obama and Goldman Sachs being his largest campaign donator when he was running, it's just very clear to any thinking person what's going on here. Unfortunately, most people are still sound asleep and don't want to be woken from their slumber. But for those of us who are paying attention, it's just amazing to see, you guys doing what you're doing, and, me and others on this more libertarian side and Republican side, even folks that are waking up, doing what we're doing, and we're all coming together in the middle and pointing the finger at the puppet. Now, for the first time in human history, I've heard you say, Rothschild here several times. That's what we're saying on this side. I mean, people are finally starting to see who is sitting at the top of the eye of the pyramid.
And let me say something on this Rothschild question, because it's not a question of the Jewish religion, because Rothschild doesn't represent Jewish religious tradition.
That's
Rothschild
right.
is a banking house. Just as the Fugger banks were that were very prominent in the period that led to the great collapse in the 14th century that led to the Black Death in Europe. You have banking institutions that will fight for their own profits. And what they've discovered is that as a conglomeration, they're more powerful. So that's when we refer to the City of London. We're talking about a handful of banks that in 1986, with the so-called Big Bang under Thatcher, wiped out all previous regulation. They set up massive offshore operations that they can avoid taxes, and they claimed they were doing this for the interests of financial innovation. Now, the financial innovations came to the United States with two banking deregulation bills in the early 1980s that allowed commercial banks to start getting involved in mortgages. And once the mortgage-backed security market got set up, in 1989, Wendy Graham, the wife of Senator Phil Graham, Wendy Graham was appointed to head the Commodities Future Trade Commission. And she used that to deregulate futures markets, which set up the commodity speculation known as derivatives. Now, in the old days, a futures market was based on the delivery of a product. So when you placed a bet on the price of corn or pork bellies or something like that, at the end of the term, you ended up with something physical. Derivatives are technically known as something derived from something of value but with no inherent value. And they started buying and trading bets on the prices. And that was the beginning of the bubble that took off in the period under Bush Jr. with the post 9/11 deregulation policies, also the repeal of Glass-Steagall under Clinton in 1999, which was, in my opinion, Clinton's biggest mistake. He was, as you may remember, somewhat focused on the Monica Lewinsky scandal.
Right.
The two people I hold responsible from the Democratic side were Larry Summers and Robert Rubin. Mm-hmm. And on the Republican side, Phil Gramm. And then Phil Gramm in 2000 with the Commodities Futures Modernization Act allowed banks to engage in completely unregulated over-the-counter derivatives operations. And so we built up from 2000 to about 2008 close to a market that included $1 quadrillion worth of trading in these things of no inherent value called derivatives. And they were sold to us as risk management tools. And, of course, they said these are rocket scientists who are devising them. They're too complicated for people to understand, but don't worry, they're going to protect you. Now, whenever you hear something like that, you know there's a fraud involved. And it started to blow out. It actually, the first big blowout, the warning sign was 1998 with the long-term capital management, which was a derivatives trading scheme designed by Nobel Prize-winning economists and so-called rocket scientists. But it was just betting. It was a systematic betting operation, and with no regulatory power left because of the deregulation bills in the 80s and 90s, and you know how they were sold. I mean, obviously, there is too much government regulation in certain areas. We don't need someone to tell us what grade toilet paper should be in the bathrooms of offices. There's over-regulation. But there are a few areas where regulation was upheld by the Founding Fathers, and one of these was on banking. And this goes back to Alexander Hamilton and George Washington, who basically showed that you could take a debt. The American Revolution had a pretty big debt on the United States. And the question then, like today, is how do you pay the debt? And what Hamilton said is that we need to have some mechanism to generate credit outside of the hands of the big bankers so that we can provide credit for the building of the nation. That was what the original intent of the Bank of the United States was. As opposed to a Federal Reserve, which is totally controlled by private banks, the Bank of the United States, the policy on credit was made by the U.S. Congress. Now, the problem we have today is we have a corrupt Congress, so we have to take this thing from the top and reorganize the whole system.
Right.
But the American system worked. We paid off the debt. We had infrastructure projects that built canals and bridges and ports and roads that cheapened the cost of the internal production and enabled entrepreneurs to borrow money with the sense that they would be able to pay it back with the production they were doing, as opposed to today where we're loaning money to pay debt. It's a bottomless pit.
Let me ask you this. We're with you on the dismantle the Federal Reserve, privately owned central bank system. Obviously, that is doing nothing but enslaving the people. But as it relates to gold and silver, returning to precious metals as a currency, I don't think that the LaRouche organization is in that camp. I think what I've heard Lyndon say is that returning to a system of government-issued credit is the way to go. But as you and I both know, we can't trust the government to do the right thing. They'll still print it. They'll print us into hyperinflation. So how do you feel about returning to a gold-backed reserve currency pre-1971, a gold reserve system? Is that where you guys are coming from?
Sure. Look, the gold specie system was the old British Empire system, and it restricts credit to the amount of precious metals you have, and that can't work today. But the gold reserve system, as it was set up at the end of World War II through 1971, remember, we did not have free trade agreements back then. We had what today they call fair trade, but we had the right to impose tariffs if we needed to protect our native industries and to protect our currency. And that system actually worked pretty well. People who said you need free trade to have trade are idiots. They just haven't studied the fact that, look, we rebuilt Europe. We rebuilt Japan. They became competitors of ours. The problems came when the British launched an attack on the dollar in 1968-69 and panicked Richard Nixon, who, by the way, was advised by George Shultz and Paul Volcker primarily on the decision to end the Bretton Woods system on August 15, 1971, which ended fixed exchange rates by severing the relationship of the dollar to gold.
Hey guys, thanks for watching part 1. Don't miss part 2, in which Harley says, quote, "If we don't do something to stop this, we're going to lose everything. We're going to have either hyperinflation or an implosion of the banking system, which will reduce the value of the euro and the dollar to nothing." Thanks for watching.